Twitter Files author and frequent guest on Rising, Matt Taibbi, was trending on X over the weekend after reportedly making some comments about what kind of stories that he likes to cover and why lately his focus has shifted to predominantly covering threats to free speech that come from the Democratic establishment. He said, quote, "There's an enormous army of mainstream media reporters already going after them from every angle, with most major news organizations little more than proxies for the DNC, to the point where stations hire Biden spokespeople as anchors." We're talking about MSNBC there. Taibbi also said the Democrats' ambitions are significantly more dangerous than those of the Republicans.
Zaid Jilani, former reporter at The Intercept, criticized Taibbi, writing on X, "You're just rationalizing pandering to the millions of right-wing subscribers the millions that right-wing subscribers give you. There are millions of people without health care in the American South because of GOP Medicaid blockade, but not as important as libs of TikTok censorship." Notice how Matt keeps saying, "I covered this thing in the past." That's exactly what I'm saying. He stopped covering these beats to pander to his new audience that made him a millionaire. He doesn't touch Palestine for the same reason, despite writing about it previously. The fact he has an overwhelmingly right-wing readership means it's even more valuable for him to cover something besides right-wing beats, but he's going the easy route, the one that makes him money, unquote.
To this, Matt responded, quote, "Zed, WTF is wrong with you? You really think there aren't enough people covering Republicans and suggesting I work for the RNC? I don't remember this kind of SHIT when I mostly covered Republicans for 20 years. I'm pointing out that I've paid dues and earned the right to pick which stories I think are more important, and giving me a hard time about criminal justice issues. It's particularly ridiculous when you've done anywhere near as much work there as I have, let me know. Also, I don't concede that the last year plus of stories like the Twitter Files have been partisan. That only makes sense if you concede the Democrats have abandoned the First Amendment. 15 years ago, I'd have been accused of being too liberal for the same material," unquote. Interestingly, Zed deleted some of those tweets. So this was a real, so Zed giving, I think, rise to a kind of criticism Matt was getting a lot on social media. I should say that these quotes were from an account that I don't really know how legitimate the account is, but I take it that Matt responded to Zed as if he had in fact said those things or that characterization was accurate. So I'm taking it that it is an accurate characterization. And he's made that argument elsewhere. I've
had this exact debate with him on my own podcast, Bad Faith, and so this does seem to be reflective of his views. And I think it's also worth noting that Zaid Jilani is not someone who is kind of a liberal scold. He's an independent journalist himself. He has very much been in line with and supportive of Matt Taibbi and a lot of his reporting, which is the point that he's making there, that he perceives there to be a shift in what his focus is now as opposed to what he did in the earlier era of his reporting. And he is not someone who is at all hesitant, frankly, to talk about things that are controversial or get you a lot of blowback from the left or liberal media sphere. I mean, people really go after Zaid Jilani for a lot of the same reasons that people go after Matt Taibbi.
Yeah, I was surprised to see him, to hear him accuse Taibbi of pandering and only being in it for the money. These are pretty harsh criticisms. Look, the statement, what Taibbi said, I agree with some of it. I don't agree with other parts of it. Maybe you disagree and we can debate about this. I 100% agree that he has the right to cover whatever is of interest to him. There is no obligation to, but if you do a negative story about Republicans or about Democrats, you have to then do a negative story about Republicans if you don't want to. You can specialize in where your expertise is, and the fact that he had all of these good contacts, a history of good reporting on the security state and those kinds of things made for a good backbone to do this shift that he's done on social media and the pressure being done there. The reporting, I think, has been very good. I think it's, and also it is true that there is no shortage of good, comprehensive mainstream media organizations holding the Republican Party and Donald Trump to account. Frankly, the right is plagued by, unfortunately, a lot of grifters and a lot of clickbait chasing people. They don't have as many really good, solid reporters to dig through things the way Matt Taibbi does. So I am glad that he is doing some actual investigative, in-depth reporting that the right cares about and is passionate about, and I think that's fine.
So the problem here is that while there is mainstream coverage of the right, I would argue it's not on the issues that Taibbi has rightly identified are important. So if he is saying that First Amendment issues are important, if the overreach of the intelligence state is important, if censorship issues are important, then talking about them without bringing up, for instance, that it was Donald Trump who initially tried to ban TikTok, that the kind of that there has been reporting that Elon Musk similarly has been willing to bend the knee and implement censorship policies on Twitter, whether it's because of his personal friendships with various people who get brought back or not brought back based on their relationship to him, whether or not it's his willingness to kowtow to India and implement the censorship that they had requested of him. And Matt Taibbi has admitted that he has declined to criticize Musk publicly in a series of private DMs that he released just a month or so ago. He said to him on April of last year, Elon, I've repeatedly declined to criticize you and have nothing to do with your beef with Substack. This is when they were feuding over that. Is there a reason why I'm being put in the middle of these things, et cetera? And Matt has also not only admitted that he's declined to criticize Musk because he wanted to keep getting information reporting on the Twitter files. And I don't say that nefariously. I think that it is something that journalists have to weigh. It's described as access journalism, but there's a bit of a push and pull of how much am I going to be willing to put up with to get newsworthy information that is of the public interest? Do I want to throw it all away for a personal peccadillo? I completely get that. But that kind of admission, timed so long after the substantial bulk of the Twitter files papers had been released, and him to date still not really criticizing Elon Musk openly on any number of these issues, does seem to suggest that maybe there's something other than just trying to preserve his relationship for the sake of journalism. And I think that he has yet to really respond to that substantively. And again, I don't think it means that you're like a bad person who's very consciously trying to court a certain audience, but everybody who exists in the media space is aware of the fact that your livelihood depends on your audience liking what you're putting out there. So you either have to switch audiences or you have to accommodate their desires. I think it would be deeply naive for anyone to pretend that they're completely immune to audience capture.
Of course not. But look, in the situation of having to deal with his relationship with Elon Musk, for whom a friendly and positive connection was necessary to get the information from the Twitter files, I think that was a very difficult situation that he handled as best as he could for as long as he could until they did have an absolute falling out break that would totally had to do with Elon's being a thin-skinned and not really understanding, frankly, what Substack is and how it was not actually he just accused Taibbi of something that was just not the case. Like you said, I don't blame him at all for not, for holding your fire for a while on the entity supplying you this information. But I don't, and I just don't agree with you on the need to criticize Elon for the India thing.
But why not?
Because it is not. We just don't agree on this. If an authoritarian government says to you, in order to operate in this country, you have to do X, Y, and Z, you're not violating your free speech principles if you say, okay, I guess it's better to be able to operate in some capacity.
But he didn't even weigh in at all, Robby. Like, that's the problem. If you're, like he's saying, he explicitly is admitting.
Violation of free speech there is
but
on
wait
the
a minute.
government's part.
If Taibbi says, if he comes out and says, I think that what Elon Musk did was appropriate there, I have no criticism, that's one thing. But instead, the implication here is he's saying, I'm avoiding articulating criticisms that I do have of you because I'm interested in getting more Twitter files. And by the way, there weren't more Twitter files. The Twitter files dropped. Like Elon Musk, as I understand it, made a trove of information available. And the subsequent kind of Twitter files additions that we've gotten have been the result of Taibbi and some others running searches on that one cache of information and reporting on it over the course of whatever it was, a year or so. So at a certain point, it becomes clear, I should think, you're not getting new information, you're not getting more information. Bari Weiss was very quickly, as Taibbi alluded to in some of this exchange over the weekend, dropped from the Twitter Files project almost immediately because she spoke out in a principled way against Elon Musk's censorship of the Elon Jets account. And there's a world where you could say, well, he was right to keep silent because he was able to keep doing reporting after Bari Weiss was axed from the project. But alternatively, you could say that if he and Schellenberger and all the others that were attached to the project stood up for Bari Weiss, Elon Musk would be in a position where he had to choose between being the hero of the Twitter Files and presenting himself as a free speech exemplar, or having to actually apply those principles, both in the case of the people who are working on the Twitter files.
Captured to do the Twitter files.
Maybe,
and it would have been shitty.
maybe, and it would have been, yes, it would have been. And that would have demonstrated, frankly, a failure of Elon Musk to really be committed to those values. And you can't get around the fact, but you can't get around the fact that
if you care more about owning or destroying Elon Musk, then I see how that.
It's not about owning or destroying Elon Musk.
But if it's about the importance of revealing what the federal government did in the course of encouraging social media companies, then it's necessary to.
Elon Musk owns Twitter now, and there is no disclosure of what he is doing now in cooperation with the government to suppress people's speech. In the text exchange that I just read, Matt Taibbi was asking him if he had been shadow banned, and Elon Musk did not deny it. He replied to that Taibbi text, "You are dead to me. Please get off Twitter and just stay on Substack." So this is a contemporary instance where Taibbi has evidence that he is censoring a major reporter like Matt Taibbi and has declined until Elon leaked some of this exchange, declined for a year. Almost a year to actually tell the public of this. Is that not an important censorship story to cover as well? Ongoing censorship.
I can recall asking him about this on our show. I think you've talked to him about your show. My recollection is not that he, when asked about Elon Musk, freezes up and refuses to say anything and says, "I could not deign to criticize the man," or something. I think what he says is that while we had our working relationship, I was, again, behaving in the way that many journalists, probably frankly including myself, would have behaved in the same circumstance, but had no ongoing commitment to Musk or refrained to criticize him.
So coming off Musk a little bit, I want to drill down on some of the explanations that he gave for why his coverage looks the way it does. And one of the first point that this April Harding woman wrote, summarizing Taibbi's remarks, was that, quote, "There is an enormous army of MSN reporters already going after them." You already alluded to this, right? From every angle. False. There are mainstream reporters going after the right, but not from every angle. If you are, and this is related to what we were just talking about, if you are substantively and genuinely committed in looking at censorship campaigns, you are going to at least do an investigation, do a search, do a word search that is broader than just terms that are associated with attacks on the right. And when I interviewed him on my show, I was really surprised because Taibbi was kind of like a Bernie guy. I was surprised that he didn't, even out of the vaguest curiosity, put Bernie or any of those other 2016 or 2020 related search terms into it to even see if there was any censorship happening. Now, maybe there wasn't, and that this is me and the left having a sense of our outside importance. And maybe it is true that the censorship against the left isn't as big as the censorship against the right because the left is not as powerful as the right. That might be true. But if you never even looked, you cannot make that claim.
I mean, didn't they look? What do you mean, didn't ever look? I mean,
I asked him point blank on my show if you had ever
Twitter files about, for instance, about the gray zone people or Aaron Mate being.
I asked him point blank on my show whether or not he had done. I asked him about the specific search terms that he was using because as a lawyer who did a lot of this kind of mass document review as part of her job, I know how important it is. How I don't mean bias in an intentional way, but how your selection of search terms can really determine your view of what has been going on when you're searching these documents. And I didn't expect that answer. I thought that I was going to have to dig farther past just Bernie. I assumed, obviously, he's Googled the obvious, but how much did he follow the trails that may or may not have presented themselves? And that just wasn't the case. Now, I don't know what he did after that, but the point of the matter is that I think when people like myself, who really value his reporting, who are happy that the Twitter files happened, are push back against him or are frustrated with some of the ways that he's gone about it, it's because we are very much invested in speech, but we're not only mad at Democrats who oppose speech, we're also mad at Republicans. And this is one other thing I'll say about what Matt Taibbi has admitted and what he tweeted about yesterday or over the weekend. He has pointed out that it's Democrats who have specifically attacked him, who have threatened him in these hearings and the like, smeared him. All of that is completely true. But I don't know that I think that is a good journalistic principle to go by, to say I'm more preoccupied in searching out kind of anti-free speech motives coming from the left because they've been meaner to me, from liberals because they've been meaner to me, as opposed to saying, I've got to look for it wherever it's coming from because one party or the other is going to be in charge. And the real truth of America is that this kind of growth of the power of the deep state has been historically a bipartisan endeavor. And so what does it mean as a journalist to say, well, I'm willing to pay more attention to one side or the other simply because for political reasons, one side is coming after me more than the other?
Let me react to that. I mean, a lot of the work of the Twitter files isn't even reacting to saying Republicans are good guys and Democrats are bad guys, because the agencies we're talking about are ostensibly nonpartisan, right? They're just aspects of the federal government, the CDC, the FBI, the Department of Homeland Security. Now, it is the case that the party that has invited him to Congress to speak on what's going on has been the Republicans.
And then in that
situation, Democrats like or the delegate Stacey Plaskett, all but calling for him to be arrested for speaking up on this issue. Those were Democrats. Even someone like AOC, accusing him of falling into Russian misinformation discourse. So that's on that. The actual work he's doing was not even the investigative work of the Twitter files was not so much even saying the Democratic Party is bad as just saying there are all these agencies that are bad. Democrats have reacted defensively on behalf of those agencies in a way that I think he and many of us find very telling.
I think some of that is true, but you can read in his own words. He acknowledges that he believes that there is more, the reason that he focuses more on the right is because there is more substantive censorship coming from the right, not just because conservatives call that particular hearing, then the target is, no, and at a certain point, that's a kind of a telling admission, especially when, we can't skip past this. He acknowledged to me that he hadn't searched for censorship against the left the way that he had been searching for censorship against the right. And again, there is a world where he does that and he can then go forward and claim 100% they're just not after the left in the same way. You can make that claim. But you cannot do that you can't make that representation if you haven't done that initial work. And so the question is, why not? Why hasn't he been inclined to look into that kind of censorship? That is the kind of critique that people like Zaid Jilani, who are very interested in criticizing Democrats and who are also very interested. I was his editor at The Intercept. His politics are not liberal in the least. Zaid Jilani has gotten dragged across the internet in the middle of the Black Lives Matter movement, pointing out that income rather than race is a better predictor of whether or not you're going to be a victim of police violence. His politics, I think, are much more aligned with a Li Fang than any kind of a liberal person, or even, frankly, a Ryan Grimm.
I guess. I personally get tired of, why are you doing X? Why aren't you doing Y instead kind of thing. If the work he was doing was, I thought, not good or flawed in some way, then I would criticize it. But if it's just but you should also spend your time doing, I'm just not going to dictate to other people how to spend their time.
He also argued Republicans have very little institutional power nationally. We're talking about the Twitter files period where Donald Trump was literally the president of the United States of America, right? Yeah. To say that they don't have institutional power because the liberals have won the culture wars is the argument that on campuses and schools and newsrooms. Yes, newsrooms are liberal if we're talking about MSNBC, but the most popular news show on TV is Fox.
Yeah.
So how are you making those
Republicans and
assessments?
Democrats have different levels of power in different places.
Yeah, but what does it mean if Taibbi does he genuinely believe that there are those kind of incredible asymmetries that would warrant not investigating Republican overreaches on speech, with the BDS movement doing what it does, with the censorship movements over Palestine? I think Zed's point about Palestine is a good one. I hadn't really considered how fulsome his past reporting on Israel-Palestine has been.
Again, maybe, and we should probably let this subject go, but
sure.
Maybe he feels like there are actually really solid outlets like The Intercept on the left who pay very close attention to this stuff, and there's not been an equivalent doing that on the right. But we'd be happy to have him back on. We have him on many times if he would like to discuss this in greater length rather than me just kind of.
Because it is valuable. I want to be really clear that the reason I've pushed back on him in the past is because I do feel like his work is valuable. And I came to his writing because he was doing important work to excavate the kind of politics that I want to know more about as a leftist. And I frankly miss that. And so people can have phases in their life and priorities for a period of time and another, but I just like to put words to the fact, give voice to the fact that I think many people on the left really do admire and respect his journalism, and that is why we'd like it to be applied more broadly in terms of the subjects being addressed, we can't dictate that to him. Obviously, he's his own person and can run his own life. But I do think that that's where the critique is coming from.
We'll be back with more Rising right after this.